This is CBC Saskatchewan News.
It is Friday, May 13th, and the CBC Saskatchewan News Digital Edition starts right now. Hi there, and thank you for joining us. We now know more about the Pope's upcoming visit to Canada. Residential school survivors and advocates had invited the pontiff personally when they visited Rome earlier this year. But as Brian Enius reports, his itinerary does not include Saskatchewan.
Pope Francis will visit Canada, making just 3 stops here between July 24th and July 29th. He will visit Edmonton, Iqaluit, and Quebec City. The people organizing the trip say he's limited to the number of cities he can visit due to health and mobility concerns. Survivors and advocates here wanted the Pope to visit Saskatchewan. They argue the high concentration of residential schools that operated here and survivors still living in this province warranted a stop in Saskatchewan. Despite this, survivors will hear the Pope's apology.
We certainly will be taking our survivors that are interested in hearing the apology, but we want to make sure that there's ways that they can be front and center and be the focus of the apology.
The Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations says it too hoped to see the Pope visit Saskatchewan. Its members were part of an event last week at the Muskowhegan First Nation, about 100 kilometers northeast of Regina, the home of Saskatchewan's last standing residential school, and the location it says the Pope should be visiting instead of Edmonton. For some survivors, though, one of the potential locations near the Pope's planned stop in Edmonton still feels close to home.
It's a pilgrimage site where he's going. It's called St. Anne. And so that's where all the people flock in from the north. It doesn't matter how far it is, people still go there.
Lafleur traveled to the Vatican City earlier this year to visit with the Pope and personally asked him to come here. She says she's happy regardless. It's not immediately clear when the Pope will visit Edmonton, but the Canadian Council of Catholic Bishops says more details about the Pope's itinerary will be released 6 to 8 weeks before his visit. Brian Enius, CBC News, Regina.
If you're a fan of CBC podcasts, the name Connie Walker will be familiar to you. Connie is the award-winning host and journalist behind Missing and Murdered: Finding Cleo, released back in 2018. Since then, podcasting with Gimlet Media and Spotify has become her full-time job. The Cree journalist is from the Okonee First Nation, about an hour east of Regina. And next week, season 2 of her series Stolen will debut, and it has a personal connection to her history. Connie joins me now from Toronto to talk about it. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
So tell me how the story came to light in the first place.
Well, it was actually last May, after the terrible discovery at the Kamloops Indian Residential School in BC. It seemed like a lot of survivors started coming forward and sharing their stories about what they endured in residential school, many of them for the first time. And it was around that time my brother Hal shared a story about our late father, Howard Cameron, that I had never heard before. And it was about how when our dad was in the RCMP in the late 1970s, he was on patrol in rural Saskatchewan and he pulled over a vehicle that was swerving on the highway because he suspected the driver was drinking. And when he got to the driver's side window, he recognized the driver as a priest who had abused him at residential school. And my dad shared this story with my brother, that he beat up the priest that night on the side of the road and then expected to, for there to be a complaint or to get into trouble or to, maybe even lose his job. But nothing happened. And it ended up becoming this story that he told my brother that I just heard last year for the first time. And when I heard that story about my dad, it made me realize how little I knew about his experience at residential school and how little I knew about what he had endured there at that school and how it impacted him and also how it impacted me in my life. And it made me want to learn more about his experience and to also see if I could try to find the priest who he pulled over that night.
So where did your research take you in the province? Where did you go?
Yeah, I spent most of my time in the Beardies and Okamasis First Nation. That's where my dad was from, and that's where he and all 15 of his siblings lived. And they all attended the St. Michael's Indian Residential School. So this podcast is really an in-depth look at this one residential school in Canada to not only learn about my dad's experience, that's where we started in the podcast, but through our investigation into St. Michael's, it was in operation for over 100 years in that community, and the impacts in Beardies and Okamasis, but also surrounding First Nations has been so vast, and really to get a sense of that, we talked to dozens of survivors from Beardies, but also from surrounding First Nations, and really tried to get a sense of what life was like for the students in that school.
I don't want to spoil how the podcast works out, but what can you tell us about the search for that priest?
Yeah, I think that there's so much that is unknown about that residential school, at least from me. Like, I didn't know when my dad went or for how long, and I didn't know, who the priests and nuns and staff members were at the school there. So one of the most important trips we took was to the provincial archives in Alberta, where the Oblates of Mary Immaculate, they ran the St. Michael's Residential School for most of the time that it was open until the early 1970s. And they, in 2018, handed over their archive to the provincial archives in Alberta. So we went there, and it was like a time capsule of what went into the day-to-day running of this residential school. So along with like the attendance records, where I found my dad's attendance records, and I found his brothers and sisters' attendance records, I found that, my dad was actually the third generation in his family to go to that residential school on both sides. Like, both of his parents went, and all of their parents went. So this has had such a profound impact on our families and our communities. But I also was able to find the names of all of the staff members and all of the nuns priests and nuns who were at that school, and find out which ones overlapped with my dad. And so that then spurred another investigation, further our investigation into those priests and nuns and staff members and what happened to them.
Connie, I'm wondering, something you said there really stuck with me, the time capsule of it. What was it like for you in that moment to see your dad's name, to see your grandparents' names on those records?
It's, on one hand, it's so validating because I think implicitly, like, every Indigenous person understands, like, in some way, that we have been impacted by this history, that we have been impacted by that. But I think, seeing my dad's name on a sheet of paper, that he was 6 years old when he was sent to the St. Michael's Indian Residential School, that most of his brothers and sisters also went when they were that age. Like, I have a daughter who's 10. Like, she hasn't stayed away from us for more than 1 or 2 nights in her whole life. Like, it's just unimaginable to think of what it was like for my dad at 6 years old to be in that kind of an institution where the abuse seemed to be rampant and widespread. And I think that then when you realize that it wasn't just him, and it wasn't just him and his brothers and sisters, but it was my Cookham and Musham, and it was their parents as well. Like, the weight of that is something that honestly I'm still trying to process and manage. And for me as a journalist, I think that what I have found to be helpful has been to shine a light, has been to like expose things, to create space for people to not only talk about these, exactly what happened and what's continuing to happen, but to create space for people to have empathy for the children that that were at that school, like my dad and his brothers and sisters, like people who I know and love, and that, I'm 42 years old and I'm just learning this history in my own family. It's also, I think, partly for me, kind of infuriating that that's the case, that I am this age, that I have been a journalist for 20 years, and that this is the first time I'm uncovering, how this legacy has impacted me and my family and my community, and that, it's a sobering realization.
Connie, thank you so much for your work on this and for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Podcast host and journalist Connie Walker joining us from Toronto. Stolen Season 2, Surviving St. Michael's, comes out on Tuesday, May 17th on Spotify. The National Indian Residential School Crisis Line provides support to any survivors and others affected. To access emotional and crisis referral services, call 1-866-925-4419. A man who was bitten by a Saskatoon police dog says he wasn't resisting when police arrested him. Instead, Justin Soroka says several officers jumped on him before the dog was released and injured his leg. The incident happened in 2019 when police were trying to pull his vehicle over. Saskatoon police say Soroka was running from the police. They eventually charged him with theft, mischief, evading police, and having fake ID. But Soroka complained about his treatment, and now the officer involved has been charged with aggravated assault.
I'm not superhuman, I don't think. I can't lift this amount of person and still be resisting, I don't think. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Another canine officer has also been charged with aggravated assault in a second unrelated arrest a year later. Soroka says he's now launched a civil lawsuit against the Saskatoon Police Service. One of the Saskatchewan doctors who has been vocal during the COVID-19 pandemic is leaving his position in Saskatoon. Dr. Hassan Masri announced on his social media that he's taken a position in a leadership role at a hospital in Ontario. Masri has worked in Saskatoon for the last 8 years, specializing in intensive care. He grew in popularity after using social media to share what was happening in the hospitals during the pandemic. He also offered advice on how to stay safe and busted all kinds of myths. Notably, Masri was also part of the medical team that worked the night of the Humboldt Broncos bus crash. In his Facebook comments, Masri blames the government's handling of the pandemic and harm reduction for his decision to move on. The number of farms is going down in Saskatchewan. A few things are behind the trend, including many small farms being bought by larger operators and the high cost of doing business. Pratush Dayal has more on Statistic Canada's latest look at the state of farming in Saskatchewan.
The last 5 years, Saskatchewan has 1,200 fewer farms, but the most concerning trend is the high proportion of aging farmers. More than 60% of operators in this province are 55 years old or higher, and that's been increasing since 2016. About a third of farmers are between 35 to 54 years old, and less than 10% of them are under 35. The National Farmers Union says this is a growing crisis because farmers are getting older and younger people are less likely to get into the industry.
We have a retiring generation of farmers and there's nobody there to take their place. Then what are we going to have? Who is going to be producing the food and who's going to be operating our farms? And so there's some big concerns here that I think need to be addressed.
The census data says rising input costs are also a big barrier. Farmers are facing high fuel and seed prices, and many are still trying to recover from last year's drought. Fertilizer and herbicide prices have tripled in price, while labor and supply shortages continue.
Agriculture is always risky, but right now it really seems to be we're at a real at the highest level of risk that I've seen with the amount of money that we've got to dump in the ground right now in order to make this crop go.
3/4 of farmers in Saskatchewan are also men, but the census showed more women are entering the field.
We're able to run every piece of machinery and be there and present for those conversations when it comes to farm making decisions. So I think it's just been following the trend of, like I said, that inclusivity of that female presence on a professional level.
The census says while higher costs are making it more difficult to enter the industry, it also shows many farmers are adjusting their businesses by bringing in more sustainable practices. Pratish Dayal, CBC News, Saskatoon.
This weather update is brought to you by Capital GMC Buick Cadillac. The exclusive export event is back.
Oh, that rain showed up as promised. Ethan Williams joins me now. We've had a few little breaks here and there, but when does this legitimately end?
Yeah, it feels like never at this point, Sam, but the good news is it will subside come the evening and the overnight hours. And we do have some precipitation totals so far. This coming in from Environment Canada and the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail and Snow Network. Yellowgrass, you're the winner so far. Almost 70 millimeters of rain. Regina, Moose Jaw, Weyburn, Regina, Moose Jaw coming in around 35 millimeters. That's as of 3 o'clock this afternoon. Weyburn with almost 60 millimeters. They had to conserve water in the city this afternoon because the rain was so heavy and it got into the sewer system, and that compromised the system a little bit there. Estevan, as of 10 a.m. this morning, 43 millimeters, so a lot of rain. Now, speaking of flooding, earlier this week we told you about Highway 135 up near Sandy Bay being washed out. The highway hotline was reporting that that road was closed, but it has since reopened. It reopened this morning, we're pleased to note, and it is because of this photo coming from the Saskatchewan Highways Ministry, and this was a bridge that they have put, a temporary bridge that they've put in place so that people can finally get access and the supplies they need. But turning now to our system in the south, and pretty clear where it is here. It looks like a big land hurricane circling the Saskatchewan-Manitoba border. Even Saskatoon picking up some good showers. Portions of west central Saskatchewan that we didn't think was going to get any rain got some today. Now this system is going to start to pull away tonight, and as it does, cold front on the backside of this is going to cool things down a little bit, pulling in some colder air from the north, and that could turn the rain over to snow or mixed precipitation for portions of east central and northeastern Saskatchewan. Not a whole lot in terms of precipitation, in terms of snow for the north. As we go through tomorrow, though, it looks like we're going to see a mix of sun and clouds in south and central. Some lingering flurries through the weekend in the far north, but not too bad as we get into the beginning of next week. For south and central, general amounts between 5 and 15 millimeters until tomorrow afternoon, not too much more. For the north, you could see some additional accumulation until noon tomorrow as well, between 5 and 10 millimeters. And in terms of snow, just small amounts. La Ronge, Sandy Bay, Pelican Narrows may be picking up a centimeter or two. Wind gusts still going to be quite breezy overnight tonight, especially in the southeast part of the province. And as we go through tomorrow, those could still gust between 50, 60 kilometers an hour. We look to Sunday, and we are still breezy, especially in that southeast part, a gust of 60 kilometers in Yorkton by the time we get to Sunday afternoon. Now, our next 7 days in Regina, we're looking for a mix of sun and cloud tomorrow, maybe some showers in the afternoon, still breezy as I mentioned, but then we do get a warm up as we start the beginning of next week. But it doesn't last long. Another cool down and possibly some more rain on the way as we get to the end of next week. Saskatoon, a pretty similar picture. We're looking at mostly cloudy conditions tomorrow, high of 17. Breezy winds, probably not as gusty as Regina just because you're a little further north. But not a bad start to next week. We even see temperatures get into the mid-20s there as we head toward Tuesday. And on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, we could see some rain showers. And I think as we get into next week, Sam, things should start to dry out a little bit. And let's hope the drive to the May long weekend stays nice, because that's coming up as well.
Oh man, if we don't get rain or snow on May long weekend, is it even May long weekend in Saskatchewan?
It's true Saskatchewan experience.
Thanks, Ethan.
You're welcome.
And before we leave you tonight, a big weekend in Canadian music is ahead of us. The 51st Annual Juno Awards will be handed out this Sunday in Toronto.
Hey, baby, let me see it.
Regina-based Tesher has received his first Juno nomination, recognized in the Breakthrough Artist of the Year category. Weyburn's Tennille Arts also with her first nomination for Country Album of the Year for Girl to Girl. Regina-born Andy Schaaf up for Adult Alternative Album of the Year for Wilds, his fourth Juno nomination. And Regina-born Colin James earned his sixth Juno nomination, bringing him to a total of 18 nominations, including 7 wins. Open Road is up for Blues Album of the Year. And of course, you can watch the whole thing Sunday night right here on CBC. And that is it for us this week. For news anytime, you can head to cbc.ca/sask or /Saskatoon, or subscribe to the CBC Saskatchewan YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching.